Yeah, perfect.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can. I can.
Okay.
I am
Can they
recording
hear us
this.
yet or not
Yes, they.
yet?
Everybody should be able to hear us.
Okay, good.
We've done this in the past couple. We've done this a couple of times at this point. Using this neat feature on Discord. Uh, we have some things set up so that we can record this for posterity. People can jump in or out. But unlike a lot of these, I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions. So, I think we'll at least start there. We'll give people a few more minutes. We haven't even hit 8 o'clock yet. I hope everything's good for you, Justin.
Yeah, that's fine.
Awesome. The it was we had a good time playing the other day with the restoration team.
I
Uh,
know. I'm sorry. I didn't even realize that. Ultimately, I saw the when you did the update
yeah.
with the video. I was like, oh crap! I clearly missed this. And then I realized when it happened, I went back and found the email. But like I think I mentioned, I'm taking care of my daughter. She just had surgery,
Yeah,
so it's been a little hectic over here. But she's doing a lot better. So
that's great.
she's taking a nap right now. So that's why I'm free.
I super get that. I'm glad to hear that everything is good with your daughter. The most of my team is off at the American Library Association, so I'm flying solo, and
Okay.
we've had a lot of stuff going on, and I think there's been a lot of interest. I know that you put out a note today to restorations backers on the Return to Dark Tower Kickstarter. So we've had a lot of interest in the Kickstarter today, and that's been great, and thank you for that. So
Yeah, sure, of course.
the the we'll get started in just a minute or two. We'll do some things. People will fall in and out of the piece. They could also be watching it on Kickstarter or on Facebook. So, Justin, are you in Massachusetts?
No, no, I'm in South Florida.
You're in South Florida.
Yeah, near Fort Lauderdale.
Okay, so that's very different than
Yeah,
Massachusetts.
no, almost the opposite of Massachusetts.
Yes, yes. If there is a place further from Massachusetts, it might be South Florida. Are you from South Florida originally?
Yep, born and raised.
So, uh,
I was born in Hollywood, Florida.
yes. Uh,
You might
I
know Hollywood, Florida if you saw Once Upon a Time in America.
Yep.
3 hours. It's sort of the long forgotten Robert De Niro gangster flick. It's like 3.5 hours long. I think there's like an extended cut that's even longer or something.
Yeah. Well, there's one thing. If there's one thing that's always true is if there's a film that is long, the filmmaker wanted it to be longer.
Right, it's true.
It's like one thing that we've learned over time is that no filmmaker has ever been like, you know what? If I could do it again, I'd make it shorter. Which is something that I, as a creative, have found later in life to be my greatest joy. There's nothing I like better than cutting something. Um, a younger me was, tried to jam everything under the sun into everything, and it took a long time for me to realize, like, paring away and getting to the image in the marble is the hardest part. Anything that's not necessary needs to go. So, well, I think that's actually probably a great way to start. Justin, if I would love to hear from you about where you all started with Return to Dark Tower. Like when you took on the idea to say, like, let's redo this game in your role as the restorers of pieces of the past. Like, where did that start? Like, what was that journey like?
Sure. Well, I've told this story many, many times as far as how I started the company, but basically, I had this sort of random idea in the shower to bring back old games. I
Yeah,
do my best thinking in the shower.
me too.
To bring back old games and modernize them, sort of basically the whole core concept of restoration games. And I brought it to Rob, and as I like to say, I made him an offer he couldn't refuse. And I said, all you have to do is make games. I'll take care of everything else. Now, that hasn't been true. Like he dives in a lot on all the other stuff too, but mostly he focuses on making games. But the idea was a cool one, and we thought the more we talked about it, the more we thought it could work. And so we sort of came up with like a list of games that we wanted to do. And then also first year was right when we started talking about it. I went to Dice Tower East, which was at the time just Dice Tower Con. I think there wasn't even a West back then.
Right.
We're talking like 7 years ago or something like that. In Orlando.
Right.
And I brought my iPad, I did a little survey, monkey survey, and I would hand it to people and say, here's a bunch of games. Which of these would you like us to see us bring back? And it was all different sorts of games because we didn't sort of know what would speak to people. People were super excited about it, and then we made the website. We had basically on our website, and you can still go there today, right at the top is what game would you like us to bring back and why? And honestly, from talking about it, the survey, the website, there's like 5 games that are like head and shoulders above all the others. And 3 at the tippy top were Hero Quest, which Hasbro decided to do.
You do on their own.
Yeah, Fireball Island, which we did obviously a couple years ago, and Dark Tower was the third one.
Was Fireball Island something that you had any personal connection to?
No. So Rob and I were born a month apart. We're basically we understand each other well in terms of we were very well aligned, like geeky kids growing up in the early '80s. Fireball Island was 1986.
Okay.
Skewed a little younger, and so by the time it came out, Rob and I were playing just full on D&D.
Right.
Whereas Dark Tower was 1982, like the hot Christmas toy of 1982. And my cousin got one. I think he had a friend who got one, and it dominated that Christmas or whatever. So that one really spoke to us. Fireball Island, not so much for either of us, but we knew obviously a lot of people did like that one, and so that was, and we actually sort of fell into a really nice opportunity with Fireball Island, whereas Dark Tower was extremely complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Return to Dark Tower, like for me, again, I'm a similar age, so Fireball Island was a little outside of my scope. I don't even remember it from when I was a kid. But Return to Dark Tower, I just remembered being like, this is everything. And then, so when I heard that you guys were going to make it, it was like early on, I was just immediately like, okay, well, I'm in. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what, it doesn't matter what it costs. Doesn't matter what it's going to be. I'm along for this journey. As I've said, I'm on record now as saying the first time I got to play it, which was pretty early in development, I was just really struck that you guys had spent the time to say the core of what made Dark Tower cool was your focus and what you really put on the table. So when you guys really sat down and were like, we're going to make this game, like what was the things that you were originally thinking about? Like what was it that you really wanted to make sure the experience was like?
Right. I mean, so obviously anytime we start with a game, like anytime we are doing restoration, we are focusing on primarily what are the core elements, or is what I like to call, what is the soul of the original game? We know we need to capture that,
right,
and and put a spotlight on it and turn that up to 11, and then sort of strip away anything that's not part of that and build a modern game around it. And so for Dark Tower, it's the tower, right? The rest of that game's pretty bad, if we're being honest, by today's standards. I mean, back then it was just fine.
It was a fascinating. At the time, it was, like a rolling move of the time, and it did things that we had never seen before. So it was, of its time, it was really interesting. But the idea of going back and playing it and then being like, oh, this isn't what I remember.
Well, so there was the theater of it, right? Like the lights and sounds and the little slideshow with the illustrations, very cool, and a big, moving tower, all that. The rest of the gameplay, not so much, but we wanted to capture that sort of wow factor, and so we've had people on the restoration, the new version, like, oh, the tower doesn't do as much as the old tower did. Well, I mean, honestly, the old tower didn't do a lot. You push the buttons on the tower, but there's nothing super exciting about pushing where you're pushing the buttons, right? And so what we had to try and figure out how to do was make the tower essential to the play, do some cool, effects, like make it fun to watch, bring some theater to it. And then obviously in today's day, and so the cool thing back then, fundamentally, like the cool part about it back then that just doesn't work today, is that it was like electronic DM, right?
Right.
Like it ran the adventure for you. It rolled the dice, so to speak. It, did the random encounters. And that was mind blowing back then. It is not mind blowing today. I have a phone that can do like a billion times more than that. I have a phone that can play Slay the Spire or whatever with a billion rooms randomly generated, procedurally generated, right? With all sorts of things. So
Connect
just
you with players all
recreating,
over the world. It could do it. So there's so many things that we would never even have imagined you could do in
right.
1982. Right.
So just redoing that wouldn't work.
Right.
So we knew, we're like, well, it has to be good. So obviously, the first thing we thought of, and I think we heard a lot of this when we were, releasing doing the Kickstarter for the game, was, hey, well, just make a cool stand, put your phone in, and you'll play the whole thing on your phone.
Right.
And we sort of almost immediately dismissed that. One, because then you're just playing a game on your phone. It just happens to also be on the table. But also, then the tower truly is superfluous, and we figured at some point it would just end up on your mantle and you just pass the phone around.
That's fascinating, and so true. And nerds are the first ones to get to that. To be like, oh, we actually don't need all of this, right?
Right.
We just pass the phone around. Uh, and the game experience would be so much less if the tower wasn't, doing its thing in the game. The menacing, like you said, the theater of it. Like one of my favorite pieces is when something happens and the crescendo, like the month end sound, and like the tower like almost breathes at you. Like I think that's really, um,
Yeah, there's lots of fun little Easter eggs. Rob put a ton of time into the sound effects of it, and a lot of it's very subtle, and you don't really notice it. And even fundamentally, like the good sounds come from the app, and the evil sounds come from the tower. But my personal favorite is when you confirm a battle card without spending any advantages, it'll laugh at you basically because it knows it got the better of you on that one.
because it knows that you have made you don't have any choices here.
Right.
Things are bad. Um, uh, yeah, no, I don't think I ever really thought about the fact that you guys were doing all of that. Besides game design and all those other pieces, you were also doing the sound design and all. I really enjoy the sound in the game, and I also really
Yeah,
like turning on the 8-bit sound.
yeah, it's fun. It's fun for sure. Yeah, I mean, to be clear, there was literally a team of probably about 30 people altogether involved in the project. I mentioned this statistic on other places, but there was literally over $1 million in development costs,
To get all of those
separate
pieces
from the
together.
manufacturing costs.
Right.
Just, it's just on a scope, not like any, I mean, I don't want to, toot my own horn or anything, our own horn, but it's just not something that anyone's really tried other than, here and there. Like something like Keyforge is kind of mind blowing in its own way. I really feel like
Right, and the amount of
this team
development
put
that
in
went
an effort to that level.
into creating that thing. Yeah, most of us, I've talked a lot about, especially in modern games, one of the things is as we get into the indie space, the barriers to entries came down really quickly, and people got to do a bunch of things. But what didn't happen is we didn't see a huge amount of what you're talking about, which is looking at this from a larger perspective and spending more money in R&D to push the barriers or push the boundaries and say where we could go and what we could do. A lot of that just kind of accretes into the gaming world over time as people find they develop one little piece, and then it's that little piece of technology can be added to the next one. And there is a lot going on here that we haven't seen outside of some large mass market type toys, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Now, you guys, when you were first starting to think about this, did you think from the beginning that somebody would want to do a role-playing game?
Honestly, not from the very beginning. So we knew. So obviously, the original game has a pretty generic setting. They gave each of the four kingdoms names
They do have names, and they have their
and
own
little banners.
their own
Yeah,
unique banner, right? There's a griffin and a dragon and a lion and a unicorn, I think.
yeah. It's so that was one of the things that struck us is it's a really sort of weird mishmash of like motifs or sort of inspirations, I guess. So the very like English fantasy in terms of the kingdoms, and then there's some weird like the bazaar is sort of a little bit out of place, Middle Eastern type music and appearance of the peddler there. Then you've got these weird gnome like with the keys, these weird like fae folk or whatever with the keys,
Right.
and then of course the brigands. The illustration of that's, by the way, the brilliant illustration by Bob Pepper. But all super weird, like brigands. I'm not even sure. They certainly don't look like what you would typically think of as a brigand. They look like sort of some sort of fiendish creature or whatever.
Yeah,
So weird mishmash
it's
of
definitely
stuff.
the Bob Pepper art is amazing, and so of its time. Like that time period, like the Hildebrands and Bob Pepper and like some of that fantasy art that the epic fantasy art that was different than the sword and sorcery art. Love all of that. But the brigands are definitely an interesting one because it does look like he set out to make some kind of monster, and then it was like, oh no, these guys are just like
Right.
bad guys. And I was like, well, let me just change that. We'll do that.
Yeah.
The
So when we were getting to work on it at the beginning, we stripped out some of that stuff anyway for a variety of reasons. Obviously when we're reworking the game or whatever, some of it just didn't make a lot of sense anymore. And then when we were first sort of building the game, keep in mind, of course, Isaac Childress was involved in the development. Now, turned out the project went on a lot longer than he signed on for. So, it's funny, some of the stuff from the very first iteration, like the names of the heroes in the base game, I think those carried through literally unchanged from almost the very first iteration that Isaac came up with in terms of the names, at least, and archetypes of those heroes. We might have changed one of them. I can't even remember at this point. But the game was very different. It had a lot more like resource management, and you would build buildings and gather resources. It almost had a bit of an original Warcraft type feel to it.
Okay.
And it was pretty cool, honestly. But we were finding pretty early on that basically the game was going to be super long if we went that route. That in order to sort of have that resource management aspect, but then also have sort of the adventure and fantasy elements that we wanted, it would be along the order of like a Gloomhaven type thing, which is obviously beyond the scope of what we were trying to do. And we also, it's a top 10 game for me, Gloomhaven, love it, but not necessarily what people who were fans of the original Dark Tower are coming back when they see Return to Dark Tower, maybe not what they signed up for.
Right.
So we ended up, but my point being that original sort of iteration was fairly generic, right? Like gather wood and gather stone, and you have a lumber mill, and you have woodcutters, and it was sort of more in the sense of like what you might find in like a Euro style game almost, in terms of resources and roles and things like that. But then once we stripped that out, obviously we still had the heroes were pretty flavorful. We had some people to fight, and originally we were just putting like placeholders in. There was a dragon, there were wolves, whatever.
Right.
Um, but then we sort of started building on that when we uh, started leaning more into that fantasy and adventure element, and then started building up that world. I remember one of the very first things we did is when we took the map, we sort of recreated the map our own. We sort of wanted a better look. The original map, definitely not Bob Pepper art. It's sort of watercolor, very, very sort of vague, not very super detailed or whatever. It's fine for a board, but we wanted to go something a little more vibrant, but also give some of the places some character. And so I remember that we made a little Google sheet, and I think Rob told me to basically just go to town, and I just named every space on the board, and that's how we came up with the names. And some of them stuck, some of them got changed, and things like that. But once you give something a name, you know this is better than anybody. Once you give something a name, you imbue it with a little bit more personality and meaning and depth. As soon as you give it a name,
I have loved in our play tests when we, because we are playing on the map, quote unquote, when we can say this is where it's happening. There's a sense of ownership. There's a sense of look, we just had a guy in the game that we played with the restoration team, and he was from the Woldra Plains, right? And so he was immediately into that, and that was like his piece. We also had a reluctant hero that was from, I can't think of the name of it. It's
Egan's End.
Egan's End. He's the hero of Egan's End, and like that was great, right? Like that was like a complete, the number of times that he said, "But that I'm the most beloved son of Egan's End." It was just so good. And it's like not a whole lot of information. It's just, here's what kind of land it is and here's a name. But it paints a picture in your mind way different than just forest town.
Right. And it's interesting. So we wanted to be careful the other way. So we intentionally didn't give the heroes specific names.
Yeah.
Because we wanted the people playing them to feel like they were them. So as soon as you call it, and I mentioned elsewhere, I'm working on a novel, admittedly not as much as I'd like to these days, but the main protagonist is the Relic Hunter, and I had to give him a name for the novel. I mean, I didn't have to, but it felt right. So I gave him a name for the novel. But, when you're playing the Relic Hunter, you want to pretend like you're the Relic Hunter. So as soon as we call it, if we were to call him Devlin, the Relic Hunter, when you're playing Devlin, you're playing Devlin. You're not yourself as the Relic Hunter. So there's a bit of a middle ground there.
I super agree with that. One of the things that we have done, forever, in polymorph RPGs is the idea of giving a specific, you want a very specific generic name, right? So the joke is, and this is a good example. You're not just a warlord. You're the brutal warlord, right?
Right.
It's very specific. Oh no, I'm the brutal warlord. Okay, that's enough information for me to understand what this is, and now I can choose to play that as a character, or I can just embody it as myself, right? But it also does say something to you as a player. It says, this is what I want to do in the game. Like, no one chooses the brutal warlord and then, immediately wants to, can we set up a time and talk peace, right?
Right.
Like, well, it was sort of
a joke from the beginning, in the sense that we were always like, oh, well, we'll just throw some more warriors at the problem. So...
Well,
as soon as warriors become your fungible resource, it felt pretty brutal. So
that does, and as the brutal warlord, you're just like, I just need all. Can I get some more? Can I get some more warriors? I just throw some more warriors at it.
Yeah.
That idea that the warriors is your resource, like that was one of the things very early on for me, where I was like, that is kind of a bright line for what we were doing and doing from a design perspective. That's a thing that exists in role playing games. It's very hard to map, which is how do I lead a large group of people. But it's so part of the epic fantasy story. Like one of the things that we're finding, in the development with the role playing game has been that people are really interested in that, but there's only, you can't give your guys names, because if you give them names, then they're characters. The moment you give them names, you want to play them. But it's, I have 10 warriors. You feel very okay with being like, oh, well, those warriors, I'm going to throw them all at the dragon, right? That's
right.
Please spend 10. Now, when you talk about the world and the names of it, I wondered if how you feel about this. Is one of the things that I'm coming is when I originally thought about Dark Tower and Return to Dark Tower was that it's a game of exploration. But as I play the board game and as we experiment with different things in the role-playing game, it's more a game about travel than it is about exploration. We know where we're going and we're making decisions about where to go instead of what's over that hill.
For sure. The idea is that the kingdoms are well known. They've been around for a while, and they were living just fine until this new adversary took over in the tower and started causing trouble. So we know we might have gotten word that there's trouble in the Iron Top Mountains or whatever, right? And so we know where those are, and we're gonna go there, and we're gonna help out. Now, it's definitely kind what we find feel there, and when we go battle, or if we find a dungeon, like dungeons theoretically are sort of discovered anew each game, that kind of thing. But in general, you're right. I think it's a questing game, not so much a exploration game. Yeah.
Right. And I think that is interesting because I think that most, especially modern games around this kind of space, it's all about like building the world procedurally or randomly or doing these different things and to give you that exploration feel. And I really do like the questing aspect, and from an RPG perspective, trying to put easy to understand rules so you're getting that feel and that experience without it bogging down. Like exploring in a D&D game is actually pretty easy. We go over the hill and it's what do we see? What's there? But it's very difficult unless you're talking about a very well established world, like the Forgotten Realms or something, Greyhawk, right? Where you're like, oh, well, I know what's over there because I read 16 novels about it already,
right?
And it seems
it's an interesting point for sure.
I'm interested to see how people interact with that when they're playing the game, when they're playing the role playing game, and the fact that there is an expectation that there's an end to it, which I think is another thing that we're bringing that's kind of different than most role playing games. I mean, you've played a lot of role playing games. Have you ever played a role playing game where you knew what the end was in the beginning?
Probably back in my IPR days, but it's been a long time. I don't know, Mountain Witch or something. I'm trying to remember.
Mountain Witch is a great. That's a great game with like a scripted end condition.
Yeah, I mean, obviously those are very sort of well curated narrative, script like games. Certainly, this is a more open world fantasy game where the ending is very unique.
Yeah,
it's one of the things I'm intrigued by. It also has that appropriate, because of that. It's ironically makes it a little bit more on the gamey side, which I think is appropriate for a role playing game that is based on a game, right?
And if there was anyone to do that, I used to laugh. Like the only mention of my work in like the Forge was about gamification within role playing games, because we've always looked at role playing games as games. There is some piece. Uh, we've made lots of jokes about it over there, in Cobalt Date My Baby, you don't gain experience points, you gain victory points, and at the end of the game, someone's a winner. Like those kind of jokes. You're trying to keep this in a thing that says want to control the story from a more game perspective so that there's some interplay. One, so that people that are coming to the role playing game from the board game, without a lot of role playing background, are going to feel like the game is helping them.
Right.
And also the other direction, right? That says, like, I don't want this to feel like an unrelated experience. And that's part of the reason that it's been great working with some of the amazing artwork that Restoration put together. It really does, I think, put you into the world that you guys have created in very, very quickly. What was it? I just said I wanted to come back around to that point, and I just lost it because I started thinking about the art.
Just the gamification aspect of it.
Uh,
So I,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I was just gonna say. So yeah, I like you said, I think it works both
Oh,
ways, right? Like if you're coming at it from the board game. So I've had some people say, "Hey, this I thought this was just gonna be like an expansion for the game." I'm like, no, it's a separate
yeah,
standalone role playing game. But if you've never played a role playing game, and that was one of the reasons we were excited to work with you on it, knowing how Mazes works and how aligned everything sort of already was,
right.
right? That like if you come at it and I never played a role playing game, but I like Return to Dark Tower, and it sounds like it might be fun. I want to give it a try. Very low entry point, very easy to get into, and I think people are gonna have a fun time sort of doing that. On the other hand, if you're a big role playing game fan and you even let's say you play D&D or some of these other games, right? And you're like, oh, this sounds cool. It's going to make sense to you and feel a little different, but you're not going to, it's not going to break your brain or anything. But it'll be an interesting, or a unique twist on what you might in a typical sort of like Dungeons and Dragons game, but also feel familiar because it's tied to that Return to Dark Tower property, right? So, like I said, when you approached us with that was the thing that had me super excited about doing it.
The one of our like ninth levels like stated goals is creating accessible games, right? Like games that are easy for people to play, easy for people to learn and understand. We don't want to create any kind of barriers. And where possible, we want to jump over existing barriers or knock them out of the way to make it easier for people. And one of the things that I've been looking at as we get closer to the end of the development here is that I'm hoping that this is a game that people will use as the first game that they've ever run,
Yeah.
because that gamification makes it a little easier for them to jump that piece. They're already familiar with the board game. They understand the basics. The game itself puts some corners around that open world kind of feel so that you don't have to do all this planning. You don't have to. Here's some things to do, and here's how you interact. If you're the adversary, it's more gamified. So hopefully it makes it feel easier for people to be like, hey, I feel like I can do that. Um, because like one of those the forever GM thing, which is always funny to me, is there's so many people that love role playing but are so petrified of running a game, and hopefully we're going to get some of them to run their first game with Return to Dark Tower for just that
Right. Well,
reason.
yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people who don't have never played a role playing game think of they even if they see something like Critical Role, right, or one
Yeah,
some of these things where they think about it's or where people are like dressing up and doing voices, and that's great and all, but honestly, for a lot of people, that has nothing to do with what they're doing in role playing.
that is not.
Honestly,
It's not what it looks like.
yeah, I mean, my group, we're very our I have a regular D&D group. It's very gamified. Like it's basically a board game with some light role playing. really not any different than what we could do with something like Dark Tower or Gloomhaven or whatever.
Right.
If in addition to the game we're playing, we're also telling a little story about what's happening. Um, so yeah, I that's why I think it's a good jumping in point. Like if you like Dark Tower and you are and the story, you're sort of building your own story as you play, right? And that's one of the things I like about Return to Dark Tower. And I think one of the things we tried, something Ignacy's whole mantra is, Ignacy Cevicek, is stories that tell games. That we want. That's what we want for board games. They're as close. These two, the role playing game and the board game, are as close as they can get together, while still saying on their side of the line. I think between board game and role playing game, right?
Right.
Like the Return to Dark Tower role playing game is a role playing game that has a lot of board game elements to it, like mechanics to it, that to drive that. But you're not going to win or lose, sort of. I mean, sort of you are, I guess.
Yeah, you really could.
It's not the primary function
but
of it.
But it's not the primary purpose, no.
Whereas on the board game side, on Return to Dark Tower, you have these amazing stories that manifest from things that happen, like some of the quests that come out or that get failed, or events that pop up at just the wrong time, or the tower spits out 9 skulls, and what does that mean when that one kingdom is getting overrun by skulls? But you're playing the game too, so like I said, they're very close cousins there, and I think that's super interesting to me.
Yeah, really. Well, I've said this before. I've said this to you. I am honored to be able to work on this. It's been a 8-year-old Chris his mind would explode if he knew he was getting a chance to work on Return to Dark Tower. And the fact that it's a role-playing game would have caused 12-year-old Chris's mind to totally explode. Because we played a lot of D&D where we had the tower on the table. We didn't know what to do with it. We couldn't integrate it in any way, but it was a really cool thing. It was like putting a skull. I put a skull, I put a crystal ball, I put my Dark Tower. Well, I really, really appreciate your time, Justin. I appreciate all of the freedom that Restoration's given us making this product, and I hope that when we're all done, we will get an opportunity for you to play it with us. So
that'd be great. I mean, if not, I'm going to play with my group. They already asked about it.
So, are you going to be at Gen Con?
We will be at Gen Con. We will actually. So we have the Covenant expansion and second sort of campaign we're doing, which recently announced we're going to be doing it on BackerKit's new native crowdfunding platform.
Crowdfunding by BackerKit.
Yeah, by BackerKit. Yeah, and we will be demoing the Covenant expansion at Gen Con. So for folks awesome. Who want to give it a try.
So that's in a few weeks. If you're going to be at Gen Con, Restoration, definitely make your way over. You can't miss them. On the piece, and we will not have a booth at Gen Con. Our books will be at IPR, Indie Press Revolution, but we are running Mazes games all throughout the show, and we will have potentially some secret Return to Dark Tower games. So that's like
cool.
That's the background. So. Again, Justin, thanks so much for your time. Thanks everyone for listening. This will be available on our YouTube channel, and it'll be on our Kickstarter page. So, with that, thanks everybody.